welcome to the deep dive. We don't just skim foundational texts here, we really try to get inside them to understand the machinery that, in many ways, still runs the world today. And today, we're taking on a big one, a truly monumental task, really, an extensive deep dive into the Federalist Papers.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. We're talking about 85 essays, all published under this one pseudonym, Publius. And you have to remember, these weren't just, academic exercises. They were a powerful, surgical argument aimed squarely at convincing the people of New York to ratify the new Constitution.
And the stakes. I mean, the way they frame the stakes themselves, it just couldn't have been higher. You have to start with that colossal claim Alexander Hamilton makes right at the beginning in Federalist Number 1.
Right.
He basically argues that the American people, by their actions, were about to decide this central question for all of humanity.
The ultimate question.
The ultimate question. Are human societies actually capable of creating good government from, and this is his phrase, reflection and choice? Or are we just, forever destined to depend on accident and force?
It's the test of reason against chaos, isn't it? They really believed they were writing an instruction manual for the first truly successful large-scale republic.
We did.
And the whole Publius thing is fascinating in itself. How you get these three giants, Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, to work together, despite their, wildly different personalities and styles.
It was a necessary fiction, really, a single mask for this collaboration. You have Hamilton, who is this driving force, the belligerent upstart, people called him. He wrote with incredible speed, always focused on the need for energy in government.
Yeah.
Then you have Jay, the genteel diplomat. He's focused almost entirely on foreign policy, on the need for union to be safe in the world. And then Madison, the painfully shy and scholarly architect of the Constitution itself.
So Publius had to smooth over all those differences.
Exactly, to present this single, coherent vision of what the new and struggling United States might become.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to follow their logic step by step. First, we have to really understand their diagnosis of the disease, the deep structural failures of the system they had, the Articles of Confederation.
AOC.
And then we'll look at the cure they prescribed, how the new Constitution's designed, from its taxing power to the executive, the judiciary, how it was all engineered to provide that energy and stability they were so desperate for, while still, protecting liberty.
To really appreciate the Constitution, you have to start with the utter collapse of the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah.
And Hamilton, in Federalist Number 15, he cuts right through all the noise to identify what he calls the great and radical vice of that system.
And that vice wasn't just, political squabbling or a lack of funds. It was something much more fundamental, a flaw in its very design.
Precisely. The AOC was built on this principle of legislation for states or governments in their corporate or collective capacities.
Okay, what does that actually mean? They were making laws for the state governments.
Yes, exactly. They were passing resolutions aimed at the state of New York or the state of Virginia, not at the individual citizens living inside those states.
And why is that distinction so critical? If Congress passes a resolution saying Pennsylvania owes this much money for the national debt, why couldn't they just enforce that?
Because in the real world, those resolutions, even though they were technically binding laws, they were, in his words, mere recommendations, which the states observe or disregard at their option.
So they were just asking nicely.
Pretty much. Publius called this idea of a sovereignty over sovereigns a solecism in theory. A solecism is like a fundamental error, an absurdity.
Right.
The logic is, if New York is truly sovereign, it can't be ordered around by another sovereign, which was the national government. It violates the very idea of what sovereignty is.
So, okay, if the national law could only ask the state government to comply, and the state government just said no, what could the Confederation Congress actually do about it? What was their recourse?
They had none. And that was what he called the total want of a sanction. The AOC had no constitutional way to exact obedience or punish disobedience.
So no teeth?
No teeth at all. They couldn't use the courts or local law enforcement because the laws weren't aimed at individuals. And they couldn't even impose basic financial penalties, what they called pecuniary mulcts, on a state for ignoring a treaty or refusing to pay its share of the debt.
Wait, hold on. Pecuniary mulcts? So you're telling me the government couldn't even levy a simple fine against a state for breaking the law?
Not in any practical way.
Right.
And the necessary consequence of that, Hamilton warned, was that the national government was left with only one terrible final option.
Which was?
The destructive coercion of the sword.
Wow.
If you can't enforce law through courts and fines. The only thing left is military force. You have to replace law with violence, a system where the national government might have to declare war on, say, Massachusetts just to collect taxes. That's a system that's fundamentally broken.
And this wasn't just some abstract theoretical problem. I mean, the whole thing was visibly falling apart. Publius described the Union as a frail and tottering edifice seems ready to fall upon our heads.
It was. You could see the symptoms of this collapse everywhere. They listed this dark catalog of our public misfortunes. You had a revolt in part of North Carolina, serious disturbances in Pennsylvania over debt.
And the big one.
And the big one, yes. The actual insurrections and rebellions in Massachusetts. Shays' Rebellion, that was the ultimate proof that the AOC couldn't guarantee even basic domestic security.
Shays' Rebellion is so key here. You have armed farmers shutting down the courts in 1786. What did that event specifically show everyone about the Articles' failures?
It showed that military force was sometimes absolutely essential for public order, but the national government had no power to provide it. Massachusetts was so desperate it had to raise its own private army, paid for by merchants, without waiting for the sanction of Congress. It basically broadcast to the world that the American government was too weak to protect itself.
Which, of course, brings us to John Jay's main contribution, the danger of all this from a foreign policy perspective. If things were that bad at home, how did the rest of the world see this fragile new country?
Jay argued that if America broke apart into, say, 3 or 4 little confederacies, a New England one, a Mid-Atlantic, a Southern one, they would be vulnerable not just to foreign contempt, but to their outrage.
They'd be seen as easy picking.
Absolutely. Foreign nations would know and view it exactly as it is.
Yeah.
And the European powers, Britain, France, Spain, they were all just hovering, ready to exploit any division.
And they would play the different American confederacies off each other.
That was the great fear. Jay warned about it specifically. Imagine one confederacy getting cozy with Britain for trade deals, while another aligns with France for military aid. He said their different commercial interests would lead to different political loyalties, making it impossible to form or honor any kind of national alliance.
The whole thing would just devolve into internal squabbling, maybe even war, fueled by foreign powers.
Exactly. The Union, for Jay, was the only shield against America cutting what he called a poor, pitiful figure on the world stage.
Okay, so the diagnosis is pretty clear. The AOC is fundamentally weak. It can't legislate for individuals, it can't enforce its own laws without violence, and it's leading to chaos at home and making them vulnerable abroad.
A complete failure.
So the cure, the Constitution, needed a massive injection of what they called governmental energy. But of course, the Anti-Federalists heard that and thought, tyranny. How did Hamilton argue for these sweeping federal powers without scaring everyone off?
He grounded it in what he saw as pure, undeniable logic. In Federalist number 31, he lays out these 2 foundational maxims. First, the means ought to be a proportion to the end, and second, every power ought to be commensurate with its object.
Okay, so the power you give the government has to be big enough to do the job you've given it.
Precisely. And since the jobs of the national government, things like defense, public safety, paying debts, are potentially limitless, the power to handle those jobs must also be, in his word, unconfined.
That word unconfined must have been terrifying to a lot of people worried about liberty. How did he justify giving the government unconfined power over something like national defense?
He was a realist. He said, look, the chief sources of expense in every government are things like wars and rebellions. You can't predict how big a war will be. You can't put a constitutional cap on the number of soldiers you might need or the amount of money it will take to win.
So if you tell the government, your job is to win this war, but you can only spend X amount of dollars, you're setting them up to fail.
You're guaranteeing failure. The power has to match the objective. And the objective, national security, has no natural limit. So the power to provide for it can't have an artificial limit either.
And this logic hits the revenue problem head on. The AOC system of just asking the states for money.
The requisition system, yeah. It had reduced the Union to what he called a state of mortification to ourselves and of triumph to our enemies. It was humiliating. This total dependence on the states for money just led to weakness, fighting, and contemptible compromises of the public good. They were constantly making bad deals just to keep the lights on.
But the fear was that if you gave the national government the power of direct taxation, it would just bankrupt the state governments. It would suck up all the available money. How did Publius counter that?
Hamilton takes that on directly in number 32. He explains this key innovation. the concept of concurrent power.
Concurrent powers.
He argued that the Constitution gives the national government the authority to tax, but it doesn't take that authority away from the states. Both the federal and state governments can tax the same people and the same things at the same time.
And crucially, the federal government now bypasses the state legislature. It goes straight to the individual citizen for taxes.
Yes. And that bypass mechanism solves that solecism in theory we were talking about. The national government now legislates for individuals, not for states.
So if you don't pay your federal taxes, they don't have to send an army to your state capital.
Exactly. They just take you to federal court, just like your state would take you to state court. This whole system preserves the state's independent and uncontrollable authority to raise their own money for their own needs.
Was there any exception to that concurrent power? Any tax the states couldn't levy?
Just one. The Constitution explicitly forbids the states from levying duties on imports and exports. That was to make sure the federal government had one primary, reliable source of income: import duties, which were the most productive kind of tax back then. By only restricting the states in that one area, the Constitution implicitly guaranteed their authority over all other kinds of taxes.
It was a very clever solution.
It was the structural key to making the whole system work financially.
And beyond just raising money, Hamilton tied the entire success of the nation to commerce. He called it the most useful as well as the most productive source of national wealth.
He saw that prosperity was the real engine of national power. Commerce, he argued, energizes every part of the economy: the merchant, the farmer, the mechanic. But, and this is the key point, only a strong national government could regulate that commerce effectively.
To give the U.S. leverage on the world stage.
Exactly. National leverage. So they could, as he put it, make foreign countries bid against each other for the privileges of our markets. They could negotiate as one unified economic power.
And what was the alternative? What was the scary scenario if they failed to unite? He called it passive commerce.
Yes, and this was a very real fear. Without a union, the big maritime nations of Europe, who all wanted to be America's shippers, they could basically conspire to control American trade. The U.S. would be stuck in a passive commerce, where American goods get bought for cheap, shipped on foreign boats, and sold for high prices abroad.
So all the profits get snatched from us, as he said.
Snatched away, enriching foreign powers and stifling America's own spirit of enterprise. He saw a strong, unified commercial policy as essential for economic independence and even for defense. A strong union could build a navy to protect its own ships.
Okay, so the Constitution injects all this energy, but that energy has to be controlled. The legislative branch then was designed to harness that power while still being, Republican in form. Madison starts us off in Federalist number 39 by defining his terms. What exactly did they mean by a republic?
It's a really clear definition. For Madison, a republic is a government that gets its powers, either directly or indirectly, from the great body of the people. And it's run by people who hold their offices for limited time, or during good behavior.
And the House of Representatives, being directly elected by the people, fit that mold perfectly.
Perfectly.
But the 2-year term for the House was controversial right away. Critics said it wasn't short enough to keep representatives truly dependent on the will of the people. How did Publius justify it?
Madison's argument was really about balancing popular connection with the need for competence. First, in number 57, he makes it clear that representatives would be chosen by everyone, not the rich more than the poor, so that popular connection was secure.
But then came the competence argument.
Right. The 2-year term was essential because being a national legislator requires a huge amount of knowledge.
Knowledge of what specifically? I mean, this isn't a local town council.
No. They needed to understand the laws, the commerce, the agriculture, the unique circumstances of all the states, from New Hampshire down to Georgia. If terms were too short, like 6 months or a year, legislators would spend all their time either running for re-election or just trying to figure out what was going on. It would lead to legislative blunders.
So 2 years was long enough to learn the job and actually do something, but short enough that you still had to face the voters regularly.
It was about balancing their role as a trustee, who uses their own judgment, with their role as a delegate, who just reflects what their constituents want. And they even pointed to history to make their case.
They looked at Great Britain, right?
Yes. They said, look, in Britain they had liberty even when Parliament had terms of 3 years and later 7 years.
Yeah.
So if a country with a king and a hereditary aristocracy could survive septennial elections, then biennial elections in a pure republic cannot possibly be dangerous.
This idea of the scope of the legislature, the sheer size of it, brings us to maybe the most famous and profound essay of them all, Federalist number 10, Madison's theory of the extended sphere.
This is the absolute core of the whole system's design, the engine, really. Madison starts by admitting that factions, groups of people united by some passion that's harmful to the rights of others, are just part of human nature.
You can't get rid of them.
You can't. Not without getting rid of liberty, which he says is a remedy worse than the disease. So if you can't eliminate the cause of faction, you have to focus on controlling its effects.
And how does a large republic, an extended sphere, do that better than a small one, like a single state?
Madison gives two main reasons. The first is what he calls refinement through representation. In a big republic, you're choosing representatives from a much larger pool of citizens. This makes it more difficult for unworthy candidates to practice with success the vicious arts of local politics. You're more likely to elect wiser people with broader views.
The idea being it's a lot harder to fool or bribe a huge, diverse electorate than a small local one.
That's part of it. But the second and even more important reason is diversity and distance. When you extend the sphere, you automatically include a much greater variety of parties and interests.
So you've got merchants, farmers, creditors, debtors, different religious groups, all under one roof.
Exactly. And that sheer variety makes it much, much harder for a majority to form around a single oppressive idea. And even if they have that motive, it's harder for them to discover their own strength and to act in unison with each other.
So the competing economic and social interests, North versus South, manufacturing versus agriculture, they act as a kind of built-in defense mechanism against tyranny of the majority.
Yes, it's a barrier to coordinated oppression. Madison was looking at the problems in the small states, like the paper money crisis in Rhode Island, where a local majority of debtors was basically using the government to cheat their creditors. The federal system solves this by moving those great and aggregate interests up to the national level, where they're diluted by all that diversity.
Okay, so if the legislative branch is designed to be diverse and deliberative, the executive branch is designed for the opposite, for speed, secrecy, and decisiveness. Hamilton's defense of the presidency in Federalist number 70 is just a masterclass in arguing for a strong, centralized executive.
It really is. And he starts with a bold claim that energy is the most necessary qualification for the executive.
Why energy?
Because the executive has to protect national security, enforce the laws, and protect property, all things that often require quick, vigorous action. And he says there are 4 key ingredients for that energy: unity, duration, adequate support, and competent powers.
Let's start with unity. Why was a single president so important? Why not a council or a plural executive, which seems safer?
Hamilton argued that a plural executive has what he called pure and unmixed disadvantages. The main one is that it introduces dissension. It slows things down. A council is terrible at responding to an emergency like an invasion. But for Hamilton, the most important argument for unity was accountability.
How does having one person make them more accountable?
Because there's nowhere to hide. Responsibility is clear. With a council, it's easy to shift blame. A member can always say, "Oh, I was overruled by my colleagues," or "the council was too divided." But with a single president, the public knows exactly who to praise, or, more importantly, who to blame. A single person, he wrote, will be more narrowly watched and more readily suspected.
Next up is duration. A 4-year term with the option for re-election. That was also controversial. People feared it was too much like a king.
They did. But Hamilton argued that duration was essential for the executive's firmness and independence. A person in office for just a short time would be less invested, more likely to just bend to the will of Congress or the public to stay popular. A longer term gives the president the confidence to hazard independent action and to stand up to the ill humors or passing whims of the people or the legislature.
That's a really interesting argument. He's saying the president sometimes needs the courage to go against what the people want at that moment.
It's the core of Republican statesmanship. He said the Republican principle demands that the deliberate sense of the community should govern, but not an unqualified complacence to every sudden breeze of passion. The president has to have the courage to resist a temporary delusion in order to serve the people's actual long-term interests. A short term would make that impossible.
And the method of selection, the Electoral College, was key to this independence too, wasn't it?
Absolutely essential. The whole point of the Electoral College was to make sure Congress didn't choose the president. If they did, he'd just be their puppet, and the whole idea of separation of powers would collapse. Having electors chosen by the states insulated the president from both direct popular passion and from legislative control.
And when it came to specific powers, Publius was very careful to show how the president was not like the King of Great Britain.
Yes, the limitations were huge. The president is the commander-in-chief, but only Congress can declare war. The King of Britain could make treaties all by himself. The president needs the advice and consent of the Senate. The powers might sound similar on the surface, but the president's authority is checked and balanced in ways the king's was not.
Let's talk about one of the most contentious powers, the pardon power. The president can grant pardons even for treason. That sounds incredibly dangerous. How on earth did they justify giving that much power to one person?
Hamilton's justification in number 74 is purely practical. It's about crisis management. He says in times of insurrection or rebellion, like the one they had just seen in Massachusetts, a single prudent person is much better equipped to handle the situation than a large legislative body.
Why is that? Because a legislature might be too slow, or even sympathetic to the rebels.
Both. He worried a numerous body might be tainted with the same spirit which had given birth to the offense. But the main thing is speed. A rebellion might reach a point where a well-timed offer of pardon could restore peace and end the whole thing. A single executive can seize that golden opportunity.
Which would be lost if you had to call Congress into session to debate it.
Exactly. The dilatory process of convening the legislature would lose that critical moment. The loss of a week or a day or even an hour could be fatal. So the pardon power isn't just about mercy. It's a crucial tool for restoring public order, and it has to be in the hands of the person who can act decisively.
So if the executive provides energy, the judicial branch is designed to provide stability and permanence. Hamilton, in number 78, calls the courts the intended intermediate body between the people and the legislature.
That's a powerful idea.
It is, but it also sounds very counter-majoritarian. I mean, this was surely viewed with a lot of suspicion. How did Hamilton introduce this concept of judicial review, this idea that unelected judges can strike down laws passed by the people as elected representatives?
He was incredibly careful in how he framed it. He didn't say the judiciary was superior to the legislature. He said it was subordinate to the Constitution, which represents the will of the people.
Okay.
His logic was this. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid. The Constitution is the fundamental law. So when a regular law passed by Congress conflicts with the fundamental law of the Constitution, the judges have to choose the one with the superior authority.
Which is the Constitution.
Which is the Constitution. So the judges aren't enforcing their own will. They're enforcing the ultimate permanent will of the people, which they expressed when they ratified the Constitution.
So it's not the court versus Congress. It's the people's long-term will versus a temporary legislative majority's will.
Exactly. It doesn't mean the judicial power is superior to the legislative power. It just supposes that the power of the people is superior to both. The courts are the guardians of the Constitution. That's how they answered that classic question. How can a few unelected judges overturn the majority? Because they're enforcing an even bigger, more fundamental majority's decision.
And the key to making this work was giving judges permanent tenure holding office during good behavior. Why was that lifetime appointment so essential?
It served two absolutely critical functions. First, there's the knowledge requirement. A free society depends on a huge, complex body of laws with strict rules and precedents. Mastering that takes, in his words, long and laborious study.
So you need to attract the best legal minds.
You do. And if you only offer a temporary job on the bench, why would any successful, talented lawyer quit their lucrative practice for it? Permanent tenure was necessary to get the best people, rather than throwing the administration of justice into hands that are less able.
And the second reason is to insulate them from political winds, so they can actually be those guardians of the Constitution.
That's the one. Resisting political pressure. Permanency creates an independent spirit in the judges, which they need to guard the Constitution and individual rights from those ill humors and transient impulses that can sometimes sweep through the public or the legislature. Judges have to be able to make the right decision, even when it's the unpopular one. If they were worried about being fired for it, they couldn't be impartial.
And their pay was protected too. A small detail, but an important one.
A crucial one. The Constitution says their salary can't be diminished while they're in office. This makes sure the legislature can't punish a judge for an unpopular ruling by cutting their pay. The courts have neither the sword of the executive nor the purse of the legislature. Their only real power is their independence.
So we've traced the whole argument, from diagnosing the weakness of the Articles.
Legislating for states, no enforcement, leading to chaos.
To the prescription. This new structure with an energetic executive, a powerful taxing authority, all held in check by these internal forces like the extended republic and an independent judiciary.
It's a holistic design.
Yeah.
And it's profoundly pessimistic about human nature in the best possible way. The whole thing is built on the assumption that people are not angels.
Which brings us to Madison in Federalist number 51. This is where he lays out the philosophical engine behind all those checks and balances.
This is the mechanical genius of the system made explicit. Since men aren't angels, government first has to control the governed, and then it has to be forced to control itself. Madison said the best way to do that is to give the people in each branch the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others.
This is the famous line, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. It basically takes the natural self-interest of politicians and uses it to keep the system in balance.
Precisely. You connect the interest of the man with the constitutional rights of the place. You give the president a veto. You split the legislature in two. You give judges permanent tenure. You build a system of internal checks so that the government polices itself. This was the great innovation that, they argued, would prevent the American Republic from falling apart, like all the failed confederacies of the past.
So in the end, the Federalist Papers are so much more than just an argument for one document. They became this incredible treatise on what political science can do and mean for any society.
And that's why we still read them, that universality. Their warnings about governance, about the rule of law, they transcend that one moment in 1787. They showed a way to build a government that could avoid the historical traps that had destroyed every republic before it.
So let's end where we began, with that huge philosophical choice from Federalist number 1. The idea that the whole world was watching to see if a government could truly be built on reflection and choice.
And the fact that the United States is now the oldest republic in the world. The fact that it survived all the trials of its early years and even a civil war, and is still here. Well, that serves as the living proof they were looking for. The Federalists gave the world a blueprint for choosing stability and freedom over accident and force. They tried to build a machine that could run forever.
That structural foresight is truly remarkable.
Indeed.
If you'd like a shorter visual summary of this book, you can find the mini explainer linked in the video description.